In the summer of 1983, Eleanor Marsh stood at the head of her irrigation ditch on the eastern slope of the Arkansas River Valley in Otero County, Colorado, and watched it run dry. The ditch had carried water every summer since 1971. Eleanor had irrigated 160 acres of corn from it. Not every year, because dry years sometimes meant reduced flow, but reliably enough that she had built her operation around the assumption of summer water. 12 years of corn, 12 harvests. The water had always come. In July 1983, the upstream neighbor filed a priority call on the shared creek. The call moved through the state water division within a week. The division engineer curtailed all junior rights on the creek system until the senior appropriation was fully satisfied. Eleanor's irrigation head gate was ordered closed. Her 160 acres of corn received 0 allocation. She had a water right. It was simply junior. She had not known when she signed the irrigation lease in 1971 what being junior would mean in a drought year. She had not known because in 12 years of farming the Otero County ground, she had never needed to know. The drought revealed the hierarchy. It had not created it. Eleanor had moved to Otero County from Kansas in 1969, following her husband's death. She'd grown up on dryland wheat ground and understood rain-fed farming. Irrigation was different, a system she had not worked with before, but was willing to learn. The farm she leased in the spring of 1971 was 240 acres of river-bottom ground along a tributary of the Arkansas, flat and productive, dependent on summer irrigation for the corn that the previous operator had grown for 20 years. The lease included access to an irrigation water right appurtenant to the land, a decreed right to divert water from the creek for agricultural use, established in the state of Colorado's water court system. The right had been decreed in 1971, the same year Eleanor began farming the ground. The landlord had applied for the decree when he purchased the property in 1970, and the water court had granted it. The decree number was posted on a placard at the head gate. Eleanor noted it and moved on. The water flowed when she needed it, the corn grew. She paid her water assessment to the irrigation district each spring and managed her delivery schedule with the district's ditch rider, who rotated water among the users on the system according to their decreed amounts. What Eleanor did not investigate, and what neither the landlord nor the lease made explicit, was where her 1971 decree stood in relation to the other water rights on the same creek system. The neighbor upstream, a man named Clifton Haas, who ran a cattle and corn operation on 480 acres north of Eleanor's parcel, held a water right decreed in 1957. His right predated Eleanor's by 14 years. In the Colorado water rights system, those 14 years were not a minor administrative detail. They were the entire structure of the legal relationship between Haas's water and Eleanor's water in any year when the creek could not satisfy both. The Colorado water rights system is built on a doctrine called prior appropriation, a legal framework that governs water use in most of the arid western states, and that operates on a principle both simple and absolute. First in time, first in right. Under prior appropriation, the right to divert water from a natural stream is established by the date of the original appropriation, the moment when a user first diverted water and put it to beneficial use. That date becomes the priority date of the water right. When water in a stream is insufficient to satisfy all rights simultaneously, the rights are satisfied in strict order of priority. The oldest right first, then the next oldest, and so on down the list until the available water is exhausted. A junior right receives nothing until every senior right above it is fully satisfied. This is not a proportional system. It is not a sharing system. It does not average the shortage across all users. When a senior right holder calls priority, formally notifying the state water division that there is insufficient water to satisfy their right and requesting curtailment of junior diversions, the division engineer orders head gates closed in reverse order of priority, starting with the most junior and moving toward the most senior, until enough water is freed to satisfy the calling right. Eleanor's 1971 decree was junior to Clifton Haas's 1957 decree by 14 years. In any year when the creek could not satisfy both, Haas's right would be fully satisfied before Eleanor received a single cubic foot of water. The doctrine also operates on a corollary that Eleanor's 12 years of successful irrigation had obscured. Consistent use does not change priority date. A junior right holder who diverts water reliably for a decade or 2 decades does not acquire seniority through that use. The priority date is fixed at the moment of the original appropriation. It does not move. Eleanor's 1971 decree would remain junior to Haas's 1957 decree in the 40th year of her farming the ground, just as it was junior in the first. The years of successful irrigation had not been evidence that Eleanor's right was adequate. They had been evidence that the creek had been adequate. Those two things were not the same. Eleanor had not needed to understand the priority structure because the creek had not forced her to understand it. From 1971 through 1982, rainfall patterns in the Arkansas River Basin had been sufficient. Not always generous, but sufficient. That the creek maintained flows adequate to supply both Haas's operation and Eleanor's without triggering a formal priority call. Haas had taken his water. Eleanor had taken her water. The ditch had run. The corn had grown. The system's hierarchy had existed throughout this period, but it remained invisible because it had not been tested. The drought of 1983 tested it. Precipitation across the Arkansas River drainage in the winter of 1982 and spring of 1983 was significantly below average. Snowpack in the mountains that fed the river system ran at roughly 40% of normal, and the spring runoff that recharged the creek tributaries was correspondingly reduced. By late June, flows in Eleanor's Creek had fallen to levels that made full supply to all users impossible. Haas, monitoring the creek gauge from his property, filed the priority call on the 1st of July. The State Division Engineer's response was not discretionary. Under Colorado water law, the division engineer is required to administer water in strict priority when a valid priority call is made. A senior right holder who calls priority is not making a request that the division engineer weighs against other considerations. The engineer curtails junior rights because the law requires it. The call is a legal mechanism, not a negotiation. Eleanor received the curtailment notice on July 5, 1983. It ordered her head gate closed until further notice from the division engineer. The notice included the priority dates of the rights above hers on the call list. Haas's 1957 decree was the most senior on the tributary. Eleanor's 1971 decree was among the most junior. She drove to the ditch rider's station and asked how long the curtailment would last. The ditch rider told her it would last as long as the creek ran below the level needed to satisfy Haas's full decreed amount. In a drought year like 1983, that could be the rest of the summer. Eleanor's corn was 6 weeks from maturity. Without irrigation water in July and August, 160 acres of corn in Otero County would not survive to harvest. The soil in the Arkansas River bottom held moisture well by Colorado standards, but it was not dryland ground. It had been managed for decades as irrigated cropland, and the corn varieties Eleanor planted were selected for irrigated production with the yield expectations that irrigation made possible. Without summer water, the crop would fail. Eleanor attempted to address the situation through every channel available to her. She contacted the division engineer's office to ask whether any water was available for junior rights on the creek. The answer was no. Haas's senior right was not being fully satisfied, and the curtailment of junior rights would remain in effect. She asked whether she could purchase water from Haas or arrange a temporary transfer. Haas was unwilling. He was running his own corn operation at reduced supply and had no water to spare. She contacted the irrigation district about emergency supply from the district's storage reservoir. The district's storage allocation for the season had been reduced by the same drought conditions, and what remained was allocated to priority users within the district system. She asked her attorney, a man in La Junta named Samuel Briggs, whether there was any legal basis to challenge the curtailment. Briggs told her there was not. The curtailment was legally correct. Her 1971 right was junior to Haas's 1957 right. The division engineer was administering the creek in strict priority, as Colorado law required. There was no legal error in the curtailment notice. Eleanor lost the corn crop. Her crop insurance covered a portion of the loss. The policy paid on a yield shortfall basis, calculated against her approved production history for the Otero County ground. The payment was $18,400. Her out-of-pocket loss on the failed crop, accounting for seed, fertilizer, fuel, and labor already invested, was approximately $31,000. The difference, $12,600, was the uninsured loss attributable to the curtailment. Eleanor renewed her lease on the Otero County ground for the 1984 crop year. The drought of 1983 did not recur at the same intensity. Creek flows in 1984 were adequate to supply both Haas and Eleanor without triggering a priority call. The water flowed, the corn grew. The ditch ran as it had run in the 12 years before 1983. But Eleanor farmed the 1984 crop with a different understanding of what she had. She had a water right. It was decreed by the Colorado Water Court, posted at the head gate, administered by the irrigation district. It was a legal right to divert water from the creek for agricultural use. It was real. It was junior. In any year when the creek could not supply both Haas and Eleanor, Haas's right would be fully satisfied before Eleanor received anything. The 1983 drought had not created that condition. It had revealed it. The condition had existed since 1957, when Haas's grandfather had filed the original appropriation and established the seniority that would govern the creek for every subsequent decade. Eleanor's 1971 decree had always been junior to the 1957 decree. She had simply never encountered the circumstances that made the seniority consequential. She had irrigated 12 years of corn without understanding the structure beneath the water that made those 12 years possible. The structure had not changed. The rainfall had changed, and when the rainfall changed enough to force the creek below the level that could satisfy all rights simultaneously, the structure emerged from beneath 12 years of adequate precipitation and operated exactly as it had always been designed to operate. She had a water right for 1971. Haas had a water right for 1957. In 1983, those dates were the only facts that mattered. The prior appropriation doctrine operates differently from the riparian rights system that governs water in the eastern United States. Under riparian law, landowners adjacent to a waterway have a right to reasonable use of the water as it flows past their land. Shortage is typically managed through proportional reduction. All users bear some share of the deficit. Prior appropriation does not share the deficit. It sequences the shortage. Senior users are fully satisfied before junior users receive anything. In a system where one senior right can claim all available flow, a junior right in a drought year is worth nothing. Not less, not reduced, but nothing. The doctrine developed in the arid western states precisely because water was scarce enough that a proportional sharing system would have left everyone with insufficient supply. By concentrating full supply in the hands of the most senior users, the prior appropriation system created certainty. A senior right holder knew what they had. The junior right holder also knew what they had, if they understood the system. Eleanor had understood that she had a water right. She had not understood what it meant to be junior. The 12 years of successful irrigation had been a form of evidence. Evidence that the water had been there, not evidence that her right guaranteed it would continue to be there. Consistent use does not change priority date. Eleanor had diverted water from the Otero County Creek every summer from 1971 to 1982. 12 consecutive years of diversion, 12 years of corn. In states that recognized prescriptive water rights or that adjusted priority based on use history, that record might have carried legal weight. Colorado does not operate that way. The priority date is fixed at the moment of the original appropriation. Eleanor's right had been decreed in 1971. It would remain a 1971 right for as long as it existed. The 12 years of use that followed had not moved that date, one day toward 1957. When Haas filed his priority call in July 1983, the division engineer looked at two numbers, 1957 and 1971. The 1957 right was satisfied first. The 1971 right received nothing. The ditch ran dry. The hierarchy had been there the entire time.